Okay, everybody. Hello. Again, it's me. I'm going to talk to you this morning about testing Fedora in openQA, and in reality, really talk to you just a bit about openQA, what it can do, how it does it, and how you can write a test case or test suite for openQA in less than 24 hours. So, who in the room has actually worked with openQA, written tests, apart from you guys shaking your head that I know have done it? So pretty much no one. Good, because I'm going to start at the beginnings, explain what openQA can do, show you it in action in production with the openSUSE builds, openSUSE instance of openQA, and then also tell the story of how I wrote a test suite for Fedora while I was bored over the Christmas vacation, and really bored, and then actually how that works, how you can therefore use that kind of approach to write a test suite for anything rather quickly. So what is openQA? Well, it's a distribution testing framework. It's actually any software testing framework. We don't care which Linux distribution you put in it. Obviously, I'm going to talk about Fedora. We've also had Android running in there. We also have Windows running in openQA now. So any operating system of any kind or the applications inside it can be tested with openQA. It does graphical testing and console testing. So in the graphical situation, it's actually controlling the keyboard, the mouse. It's actually looking at the screen and able to do image analysis of the screen. So we have this concept called needles, where you basically define which areas of the screen you're interested in. Those are then stored and pulled up for comparison when the tests run. And it's doing an image analysis on those portions of the screen. Other parts can change, nothing else matters, but you can actually have UI elements found. So it's basically a software robot that has eyes, fingers, keyboards. It can do all of that. And on the console side, that's a little bit more traditional, looking at a serial console, throwing stuff into the command line, seeing what gets out of it. We use it in openSUSE for building the main openSUSE distribution. We use it for Tumbleweed, and obviously SUSE are now using it as well for SLE. So it's really the magic behind the Tumbleweed rolling distribution. In the past we had Factory. Factory was great, but broke all the time. And using openQA, along with the staging process where things are tested before they get put into Tumbleweed, we've now turned it into a rolling release that everybody can use, and it works very fast. And it's really all thanks to openQA, pretty much. We test staging, we test changes as they're coming in, and then we test the entire distribution before we publish it. So we know that individual change hasn't broken anything, and we know that the entire distribution as a whole, it works, it boots. All the applications we have test written for it all start up. They all do the things we've told it to test. And that's why we can be so confident that the Tumbleweed snapshots that we're now doing 4 or 5 times a week are actually going to work when you're running it on your machine. So this is an example of an installation test. I actually took the screenshot from SLES 11SP4. I don't know why. I should have done openSUSE, really. But this is where openQA really started for us. We needed to test the installation process in openSUSE. We needed to have it testing YAST. You haven't really got much of an environment there when you start a machine up, and everything's just being installed in the first place. So openQA is doing it all in the VM, looking at that screen. The top there, with the mouse cursor, there we go. On this screen here, this is just checking the installation settings screen in the installer. So the only part that we really care about, because everything else can change below, is does it say installation settings at the top? So that green box is the needle that we use in openQA. If anything else changes on this screen, so if the theme changes, the text changes, anywhere else, it's not going to care. So the nice thing with these tests is we can be incredibly detailed on the parts of the UI that we care about, because if this installation settings font changed much at all, it would fail the test and we'd immediately know that that screen's broken. But all the other parts of the UI which we know might actually have change, there might be dynamic parts flying up, We can just tell openQA, that's okay, ignore it, that's fine, move on. We do exactly this. We also do the same for the application testing. This is obviously our test for Firefox. And the box in the middle here, which is incredibly fuzzy, so I won't try and show it in too much detail, actually is showing the version number section of the About page of Firefox. And in the case of that, we're able to actually tune openQA a little bit more than that. So the version number in there changes every time there's a new version of Firefox. But because it's doing image matching, and because we can tell it to do fuzzy image matching, the fact the version number characters are changing numbers don't actually cause the test to fail. So we don't have to go in here and update the screenshot every single time there's a new version of Firefox. That's fine. But if any of the other text changes, we'd notice, because the difference would be higher than the, was it 3% for that? Yeah, I think we've said sort of, yeah, it has to be 97% accurate for that test. And like I said, we also do an awful lot of console testing. About a third of all of our tests are console-driven, not looking at the UI, not looking at the graphics at all. Nice, traditional, throw something into the command line, get something out and have a look at it over the serial console. In openQA, we still have this lovely web interface, so you get to have a nice screenshot. But you know, in the background, it's doing all this wonderful, geeky terminal stuff where it's, in this case, looking at curl, making sure that the response comes out all right, and then reading that over the serial console so the test can pass. So we have a rather large team of people working on openQA. These are the ones that are mainly working on openQA for SLE and openSUSE. Also Bernard as well. I'm sorry I forgot your name on this list. It's getting a bit crammed. The team's always getting bigger. We've got more and more people working on it on various different parts, writing tests, writing stuff on the back end, and we'd like more. And we've now also got Red Hat contributing to openQA. This is kind of a side effect of my experiment over Christmas with Fedora, because while I was using those tests with openQA, I ended up finding quite a few blocker bugs in Fedora 22 and Rawhide. So I filed them, and I kind of had to mention that this automated tool found them. So they, took what I'm going to show you later, actually have now implemented it themselves, and they're actually running it inside the Fedora project for testing Fedora 22 and for Rawhide. They've also had quite a lot of fun messing around with Docker. So they're actually using Docker to deploy their openQA installations, which is not something I'll be going into detail, but I think that's kind of cool. And they're also working with us for, well, a few patches, ideas, feature requests, that kind of things. And also new tooling, because most of openQA is written in Perl. I think all of openQA is really written in Perl. And they really hate Perl, so they're writing lots of fancy Python tools to kind of wrap around what we're doing and kind of replace the tooling that they don't like in there. There's a public instance, which I will show you quickly. Not that one. Which shows the current state of Fedora Rawhide. But yeah, it's testing it really well. It's just not booting very well at the moment. So yes, openQA in action. So, like I say, this is the Fedora version. This is ours. Tumbleweed is in a much better state. Although, how come we have 100 tests today and 118 yesterday? Oh, so we tested it twice as well on one day. Okay, that's cool. That's also why it failed twice as much. Yeah, okay. So yeah, on openQA we have this nice new web UI, which Kulo mainly worked on, which shows all of the different products or parts of openSUSE that we're testing. So here's Tumbleweed. We also have the ARch64 of Tumbleweed down here, which is currently being tested right now, as well as PowerPC and various staging projects. So when these tests are run, these are actually tied into OBS, so when there's a new build that needs to be tested, we start the job automatically starts in openQA. And on this web UI, you can actually see the tests running. I say, as it takes a while to load up. So in this web UI, yeah, it's ARM. It's taking forever. So instead of showing you a rather slow ARM machine, okay, instead of showing you a rather slow ARM machine, I'll show you power to make Dina happy. And there's no running test, but I can fix that. I was logged in. I don't know why this went wrong. There we go. So we have all of our products. We have all of our different parts of the distribution. It's all split into different builds, so as we have new versions coming up, each of them get tested individually. We then get this outlook, which actually shows all of the actual individual tests. So in here, we're testing GPT, LVM, a minimal X installation, multipath, and the rescue system. And these ones are all green, so I'm going to restart this job here. And now openQA automatically, all on its own, has started up a VM on Power. And this is now totally automated, running through an installation of openSUSE Tumbleweed on Power. And at the same time, live streaming the whole thing on the web so you can monitor it in real time as it's doing its thing. I'll just wait till it gets to YAST. Is this a graphical install? Good. I should have really had a look at the results before and make sure that it looks good. Ta-da. So yeah, here's our welcome screen. Pardon? Oh yeah, now you can see. Yeah, yeah, now you can see the mouse disappear off the screen. Yeah, I think I'll cut away before that happens. But yeah, come on. Oh well, you get the idea. So yeah, get to the welcome screen, and unfortunately at the moment we've got a. Well, I've put in a slight delay on all the tests, which spend about 30 seconds sitting here, so it can move the mouse in the top left-hand corner for SLE. On SLE 11, it takes a little while longer than it does on openSUSE. So this is going to sit here for like a minute before it starts moving on. But you've seen it, it starts up, it controls the installation process. When it's finished with all of that, you have all the test results. So all of these results get broken down in a test-by-test basis. So each individual component is shown, and whether that individual component's passed, and all of the various needles that we told openQA to have a look at, so all the various screenshots or screen elements we said you're interested in, it takes a screenshot for each one of those and stores it, so it can then show it on here. So you can actually step-by-step see the whole installation, the whole application test, whatever you're running openQA for, step by step, each, and see, did it work, why did it work, did other things happen that maybe openQA wasn't actually looking for? Like here, where it's looking at the partitioner. And then putting that all together at the end, it also records the whole thing in a video. So if there's something that you're not interested in on the screenshot side, but maybe it slipped in between while the test was running, this video will actually catch it. I say as I wait for the video to start. I did look for my network adapter for this laptop, but I couldn't find it. So I'm on the Wi-Fi. It's a little bit on the slow side. Actually, I have a plan B. And if you're doing a text mode installation, it looks something like this. Although, for some reason, there we go. So it runs through an installation. You can see it all in action. And you know that what's been tested is actually passed. So if you're interested in contributing to openQA, the main website is there. On there we have all of the documentation. We have recordings of videos from various OSCs in the past. Probably these ones will end up on here at some point as well. And the documentation is actually split into various different sections depending on what part of openQA you might be interested in. So, you know, there's a user's guide, installation guide for somebody actually installing the system, a developer's guide for anybody who wants to work on the back end, the real meat behind the thing, the web UI, and sort of that whole engine. And then there's a test developer's guide, which just cuts down to the parts that you will be interested in for actually writing your tests. So you don't need to worry about all this wonderful back-end stuff, but you just need to know the API calls you need to write in your scripts so you know, so you can actually get the test to actually run. When you're actually contributing code back to it, these are the 4 repositories you might be interested in. Of course, the main one is OS Auto Inst Distri openSUSE, which is where we keep all of our tests, everything for openSUSE, everything for SLE. We put it all in this one big test repository. And they're all there, so you can have a look at actually how we're writing our tests. You can learn from that, especially when you get to some of the more crazy stuff with complicated UI testing, where you kind of want to do stuff like, okay, if this thing flashes up on the screen, then do this 20 different things, but if something else happens, then do something else. We've written all of that already, so you can have a look in there, see exactly how it's done, and base it off that. Fedora's tests are in their bit bucket. I don't know why they're not submitting them to us, but I guess we can have a chat with them about that. But they're there, and those are the tests that Fedora are using for testing their distribution. The backend, which is OS Auto Inst, the sort of original part of openQA, is in the OS Auto Inst folder. And the web UI is what we actually call openQA in the Git repository, and that's where all of that web front-end stuff, the website, the logging in, the live streaming video, all of that. I don't want to go into too much detail about that because Ludwig is talking about this in much more detail tomorrow. So if you want to have a view of sort of more of the architecture and actually how openQA is all put together, Ludwig's talking about it at 1:30 in the second room, just over there. So, writing openQA tests for Fedora. The first thing you're going to need, in my opinion, is a notebook. No computer, just a piece of paper, and a pen. I found this the easiest way of doing it, of just starting up whatever I want to test. So in my case with Fedora, starting up a VM of Fedora, and then installing it just like I usually would. The only thing I really try and do to make my life a lot easier is be very keyboard centric, because it's a heck of a lot easier to write tests where you're just slamming keyboard entries in all the time than having to control the mouse and tell it where to click and all that stuff. So if you can do everything over the keyboard, you can write tests to test that much, much easier. And it's an awful lot easier to write those notes initially and then convert that to code afterwards. But it's also good to take a point of, like, when would be a good time to take a needle? Gesundheit. So when would there be a good time to take a needle? Which screens are really relevant to have a look at? Which UI elements are really important for that part of the process? And make a note of those, so when you come to actually writing your code, you're able to do pretty much the entire thing blind, and then you can just throw those tests into your openQA instance and run them, and then just take the screenshots for the first time, and then that's it, you're done. You've got your code written, you've got your screenshots taken, and you've suddenly got a fully working test suite. So when you're doing the installation, the way I would recommend it with the notebook is kind of have one test per page. So if you kind of think of what you're testing, split it into sensible logical groups. So in the case of, let's say, Yast or Fedora, that's easy. Pretty much every screen of the installer makes a perfectly natural next stage. So that's one piece of paper per test, one line per key press, and one line per needle point. So you just basically have this nice long list of all the instructions you're going to need to automate this test. So for the welcome screen in Fedora, this ends up looking something like this, which the first thing you need to check is the welcome screen. Did it actually show up? So there's actually a, I'm missing a slide. 1 minute. No, I'm not. I'll just talk to it. Okay. So the top line there obviously is the name of the test. The next line, well, I've said N, that's my sort of shorthand for make a needle here. And then the text afterwards is just probably some gibberish that I'm going to use as the identifier when I'm writing the test. So, you know, the welcome screen in this case. So take a screenshot of the welcome screen. After that, I'm just writing down the key presses I press to get through the installation. So I pressed write once, I pressed return. Another window popped up, in this case the language selection. So I thought, okay, that'll be a good thing to make sure openQA checks that the language selection turns up. To get the language selection to go away, you press Alt-C, so I wrote that down. And then, because I was messing around with Fedora 21 and Warhide, when you're messing around with Warhide, you sometimes get a beta message popping up saying, you know, this is beta software, carry on your own risk. So made a little note of that, you know, in this test there's sort of this conditional situation where if I'm testing different versions of Fedora, it might not happen, but it will in this one. Take a needle to see that the beta warning is there, that it actually turned up. If it does, you need to press Tab once because you can't auto-select it, so you have to actually make sure that the selection of that appears. Press N. They have a really nice warning pop up with their beta that says, you know, do you accept your fate? So yes, you do. You press return, and then you end up at the Fedora summary page. And in fact, that's what I'm missing. So doing it manually, it ends up looking something like this. I wish I could do this with the screen. Is that going to work? Maybe. Now, this is a fun experiment, because I tried this a week ago, and all these commands still mapped up with this version of Rawhide, or the version of Rawhide I was testing. This is a slightly newer version, so hopefully they haven't changed anything. So yeah, here's the Fedora welcome screen. Press write, press return. Nothing happens. And the demo effect kicks in. Hey. Okay, forget about that. I'll show you later when it worked. So you have all these notes. You've gone through the installation. For each stage of the test, you have a piece of paper with all of the commands that you need to do to actually have the software run through that step. And you have all of the areas where you want to write a screenshot. So now it's actually time to get down and dirty and write some code into openQA. The openQA test suites are all arranged in individual folders, like this. And this main PM is the most important part of the test suite, in essence. It's the bit that openQA will actually run and defines the order of which tests does it run in which order. So in a really simple test suite, like the Fedora one that I'm showing you here, is each piece of paper that you've currently got, that's each one of your test modules, translates to one line like this. You know, load test, bleh, test whatever. So you can, even now before you've actually got anything executing, you can actually write your main PM, just throw in a whole bunch of load tests. If you want to use subfolders, you can when it comes to actually storing the test later. So here we put everything in an installation test subfolder. And we have a welcome module, a partitioning module, installation summary, root password, blah, 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 blah. Actually making the test files, as you saw there, we have a tests subfolder, and you can split it into further subfolders for actually splitting things up. So, for example, installation tests, console tests. If you have a really complicated application, it will probably make sense to have that with its own subfolder and keep all the tests in there. And then you just make one file, so one file name .pm for each of those test modules that you've already defined on your notepad, ready to write code for openQA. If you've taken this approach for openQA, you pretty much need just these 4 API calls to get started. To check the screen, to check the needles, you need to use either a search screen or check screen. A search screen is basically fatal, so it'll have a look at the screen, check that the needle matches what you've told it to, and if it doesn't, that's it, test over, test failed. Check screen's non-fatal, so it comes in really handy where you have conditional situations, like, you know, something might appear, then do this. So we have that as well. For setting key presses, all you need to do is use the send key function, and to type a string, you need to just use type string. Nice, easy, straightforward. So when you have our example like this, in openQA's Perl, but kind of almost a domain specific language, a test like that looks something like this. So at the top we have a search screen where we say, yeah, look for the welcome screen. And the 120 after that is the timeout. So basically you have 120 seconds to get to the welcome screen. Once openQA hits that timeout, the test will fail anyway. So on different architectures, like on Power and ARch64, we actually now have a sort of universal modifier, so we can say take these timeouts and, you know, multiply by X, so that we don't have to go and rewrite all these tests for all those different architectures. So yeah, well, yeah, of course, Power would be less than 1. You want it to be testing everything quicker. Yes, and then on ARch64, I think it's like 3 or 4. And what was the one that I changed? Oh yeah, because we're normally testing in VMs here, the VMs are normally highly optimized. You know, we're normally not writing to disk, we're writing everything to tempfs, so everything's going into RAM. We've now started testing stuff in real hardware, so we have both IPMI and AMT interfaces, so we can actually go to a laptop or a physical machine. openQA treats it exactly the same way, starts it up, and is running through the installation process. And when we started doing that, we suddenly realized we had a problem, because real hardware is slower than our VMs. So all of our tests started failing because all the timeouts were suddenly way out of, really, really wrong. So I'm now actually using that multiplier to actually, I think, give all these timeouts 3 times longer, just so the real hardware can actually boot to the same speed, get to the same point. And that's great because I don't have to go rewriting all these tests. So yeah, wait 120 seconds, get to the welcome screen. So that covers that whole kind of pre-boot part of the VM that, like I showed you, which you don't really care about. You know, it's going to start up, it's going to get there. Who cares? Press a send key. So send key right. then press enter, send key return, or ret. Then the language selection pops up. For some reason, I gave it 60 seconds here. I guess I was being rather generous. Normally, I either leave it to the default, which is 30 seconds, or it's a very good idea to keep it as short as sensible, because you want the test to fail. If you're testing something, and you don't want a user waiting a minute before a window pops up. So you can actually use openQA to test the softer sides of quality, not just it works, but it works in a relatively decent speed. Press Alt-C. And then, in the case of Rawhide, we have a sort of a beta variable. So when we're testing something in openQA, we can say, okay, this software is, beta, set the beta flag to 1. So when openQA comes along, we just can tell it to use that variable, and you immediately knows, okay, this software is still under testing. And then, like in this situation, or in the same case with SLE, where SLE behaves slightly differently when it's a beta version versus when it's a release candidate or a real version. Those slight difference in behaviors in the software can still be written in the same test, so you're not writing 2 different tests and having to worry about 2 separate sets of code when you have to work with everything. So that will split into the if there, checks that the beta warning appears. If it doesn't, the test will fail and go away. Press tab, have a look for the fate except screen, press return, and then you end up back at the installation summary. So you do that for every single one of those pieces of paper that you wrote down when you did your sort of first trial Fedora installation. And between those 2 processes, both doing a basic installation with the notes and then converting all of that so you've written it as your tests, takes about a day. If you've done it plenty of times before, you can do it quicker, but as a complete beginner, which I kind of was when I started doing this, took me about a day. And then at the end of all of that, this is actually a video recording of the first time I ran it after taking the screenshots. You end up with a broken video. There we go. The video recording of it booting up. And installing, type in the root password, and that's it. The installation is now running. It goes incredibly quickly because openQA, when it's recording video, only records the frames that have changed. It doesn't actually record the real time, how long it took on that frame. So it's Oh, really? I didn't know that. Thanks. Did we change that? Okay, fine. No, because he's correcting me, and I'll just stick with that, and we can correct everybody else later. Tell everybody. Okay. No, I was actually wrong when I was saying that it's only recording the frame changes. It's recording at a factor of 12 faster than it should, so 2 frames per second, but then the video plays back at 24 frames per second. So that's why it looks so quick. But if you pause the video and scroll through it, you can actually see things in a much simpler case. So this is a really simple test case. Throughout this entire process, I'm just kind of doing the basics, clicking next to everything, not going into like the partitioner and messing around with actual partition options and messing around with disks. But for testing anything new, this is how I'd recommend you start. Just do the basics, get your basic test there, and then you can expand on that, add extra modules when you want them, add extra variables when you need them, so you can have more, if this is set, then do the crazy stuff in the partitioner, or if this is set, do the crazy stuff with the software selection. And over time, you end up with a very, very complete test suite that can test anything you want in openQA. So, any questions? Yes. Yep, you want.
Is there a possibility to do text recognition?
Text
recognition.
OCR.
Yes.
No, we can't do text OCR on the graphical side. yet, can we? We can. Okay, we have experimental support for OCR in there.
Nice.
So experimental, I didn't know about it. Does it work? No. We never tried. Okay, there is experiment. It's so experimental, it's there, but we've never tried it. For the text recognition, we normally use the proper console testing. So we try and do that kind of stuff in the console where you can actually read the actual text output.
Okay.
So yeah, that's so. Otherwise, in the case of, let's say, the like as an example where I showed you the Fedora about screen, if you want to be like absolutely pedantic that this text must always match exactly what you wanted, you just set that needle to be 100% or 99%, and then there'll be any change of any character there would immediately get noticed. So it's okay. That's checking exact for exact, but you can do also composite needles, so you can have one big screenshot with many different parts of the screen that you're interested in. So you can, that's often what I use for sort of taking out the text parts I'm interested in. I'll just slice that part of the screen as a needle and do it that way.
And what about audio? Audio input and output?
Audio output we do have tests for. They're doing DTMF tones, so it actually plays the sound through there and compares the sound that was output with the recorded sound in openQA that we wanted to match. Do we test input at all? No, we have no input testing in there though at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Cool. Any other questions? Yes.
Would it be an option to use something like a keyboard recorder instead of writing the key presses manually when you write tests?
Yeah, I mean that would work as well. That would probably be if you had a keyboard recorder that actually pushed out a nice, easy to read format, you could probably do a script and just have that write half the test for you. If you come up with a way of doing that, please let me know, because that would make my life easier.
Well, the problem is I have enough projects already.
Yeah. Cool. Anyone else? Yeah, cool. Yep, someone here.
So in the example you use KVM, I think, but can I just use anything you like to run a test on?
We have various backends we support. The main one we use the most is KVM. I also mentioned that we have an IPMI one for testing real hardware. We also have an AMT one, which is mostly finished. I think the serial console is still missing. Yeah, Kulo's saying no. Okay, maybe we've got that fixed. We're also testing on S390, which has its own backend for mainframes. And there's various other backends that are in either various stages of development or bit rot. For example, there was a Zen backend at some point that so for testing different hypervisors. So the software is modular enough that we can very easily add more backends for those kind of scenarios where you want to test different hypervisor or different hardware or something like that. So yeah, at the moment those are the main ones we're using, but we're always kind of on the lookout for what makes sense for adding new feature sets to that. Cool. Anybody else? Nope. Pardon, sorry, I can't. Yes, so like I showed the screenshot of the Firefox one there, but I can actually, the question by the way was, sorry, are we testing any applications as well? So if I go back to the web UI, which for some reason I can't see where my Firefox has gone. There it is. So here, for example, with the Tumbleweed one, all this bit here that you see is the installation. But if I pick a test that actually does application testing, I'll pick KDE for a change. After the installation's finished, we're testing a whole bunch of applications on the console here. So, for example, testing Yast. And here's Yast screenshots. But then we flip to the UI, and we're testing lots of different parts of Chromium, for example. Like the HTML5 test is actually firing up Chromium, typing into the application, go to this URL, do a HTML5 test, and then this is actually also analyzing the output of that, so you can see that it's actually able to go to a website and it's rendering in the way that it would be expected. So in the case if you wanted to do like just application testing and just forget about the installation, openQA has no problem being fed a disk image rather than an installation ISO. So you can have like a VM with your openSUSE or whatever that's already installed, and openQA can just start that up and then start your application that you want to test and run with it that way. That's actually similar to my Hack Week project where I tested openQA in openQA. So I basically made a VM of a standard openQA server with the web UI and the backend and all that stuff. And I then have another openQA machine, start that up, start a test inside there, and then test everything on the console and fire up the web UI and test all the parts of the web UI and see that basically everything I showed you here is still working. So yeah, application testing is no problem. Yes, Andrew?
What about application stacks? Self-deployment or an OpenStack deployment?
Yeah. The technology's there, people just need to write the test. So we can do that. So for example, the HA stack for SLE is being tested this way now. And yeah, self-deploy, that kind of thing. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be using the KVM backend, you might have to be worrying about stuff like nested virtualization. But if you're using something like the real hardware backend, the world's your oyster. I mean, you can do crazy stuff with that. Yep.
How well does it integrate with OBS?
With OBS, really well. In terms of practical sense of every time there's a build of what we're looking at, it starts up and gets testing. I'll be honest though, the code that we do to do that needs a bit of a tidy up. It's this kind of wonderfully complicated rsync Perl script that's kind of looking at OBS projects that we're interested in and then does all the magic to make openQA do it. And yeah, we could do with tidying it up a little bit, but it works. So whenever there's a new Tumbleweed snapshot or a new staging thing, it's there, it's fine. And Fedora also have their equivalent with FedFind, I think, which is their thing looking at their equivalent and doing the same thing. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, Dax.
Did Fedora increase the number of ISOs they build now that they have openQA?
Hmm?
Did Fedora increase the number of ISOs they build since they have openQA?
No, they're still producing the same number of ISOs as they always build. That hasn't changed. So it's mainly, for them, they've been working a lot on their own testing tool called Taskatron for a long time, which was basically stepping into their manual process exactly the same way they always did it. With openQA, that's kind of dropped in there and done that, so they're still, process-wise, still doing the same old processes they used to with manual testing, and just kind of triggering openQA semi-manually at the moment. But that'll change. I mean, it's, you know, I did my tests in December, it's now May. You know, the world doesn't change overnight. I wouldn't be surprised if they start wanting to test more things faster and faster and faster. Oh, which is, yeah, one thing I forgot to mention with this. The backend is actually also incredibly scalable, like OBS. So at the moment we have for example, the SUSE Linux version installation of openQA, I think something like 24 workers now on various different architectures. So we can do 24 tests in parallel. So you can have a really complicated test suite with a whole bunch of different installation scenarios or application tests. New build appears, and you've got 24 of them running all at the same time. And just like OBS, you can keep on adding more workers as you need it with more hardware. So, which is really fun. But at the same time, it's nice and small. You can fit it running on a laptop. Last chance for questions? Nope. Wonderful. Thank you very much.